Canada is often recognized as the star of the business class, with its vast natural wealth, high standard of living, and stable political structure. But what if I told you that this image is underpinned by volatile consumer prices, deepening debt crises, and a weakening labor force? While inflation has slowed to 2.3% year-on-year in March 2025, core price pressures remain high. In contrast, the unemployment rate climbed to 6.7% in March, the highest level since 2021. Moreover, the economy was reported to have contracted by 0.2% in February, but showed signs of recovery in March, albeit limited, at 0.1%. Although house prices have slowed from January, the national average house price in March 2025 was still $678,331 Canadian dollars. While in the rental market, the average asking rent for a two-bedroom apartment alone is $2,280 Canadian dollars. On the other hand, the household debt-to-income ratio rose to 172.8%, close to a record high, while the debt service ratio at 14.4% still points to a historically high risk. The Gini coefficient, which measures income inequality, reached 0.288 in 2021. In this video, I will take a comprehensive look at the root causes of this shaky outlook for the Canadian economy, from monetary policy to trade tensions, from the crisis in housing and consumer borrowing to the dynamics of social inequality. Your help motivates me a lot while making these videos. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel before watching the video. One of Canada's most important problems for many years has been high household debt. Mortgages and consumer loans account for the bulk of this debt. In 2015, the IMF reported that one of the most vulnerable areas of the Canadian economy was people's debt to financial institutions. In 2025, in contrast to the global economy, we see Canada's debt levels falling slightly. As we said, mortgage loans make up the bulk of household debt ratios. Low interest rates in Canada are driving up housing prices. When factors such as inadequate housing supply, immigration, and population growth are added to this, housing prices can be almost 8 to 9 times the annual income of a typical Canadian. The ratio of housing prices to incomes in Canada is considered to be quite high among developed countries, and this is one of the key indicators of the risk of a housing bubble. As of February 2025, the average house price in Canada is approximately $712,400 Canadian dollars, down from $718,500 Canadian dollars in January 2025, and down slightly from an all-time high of $834,700 Canadian dollars in February 2025 and 2022. These figures are higher in the country's major cities such as Toronto and Vancouver. So why are housing prices so high in Canada? The main reason is low interest rates. For the last 25 years, the central bank has kept interest rates low. So low interest rates mean cheap credit. Cheap credit means more borrowing. Another reason is the insufficient supply of housing. New housing production, especially in big cities, lags far behind demand. The process is slow because land restrictions, local building permits, and environmental regulations take time. Another reason is that home ownership in Canada is considered a sign of wealth and stability. This cultural pressure has encouraged people to buy homes, even with debt. The Canadian government has tried to curb the skyrocketing housing prices and make home ownership easier through a series of measures such as a ban on foreign home sales, financial support for first-time buyers, and mortgage relief. However, experts emphasize that prices are still high and informed decisions need to be made to increase market mobility. One of the biggest contributors to a strong economy is the energy sector, especially oil and gas. Alberta's oil sands make Canada a global giant in energy exports, but this dependence of the Canadian economy on the energy sector poses significant risks in 2025 due to volatility in the global oil market and political uncertainty. For example, in April, OPEC Plus increased oil production to 1.5 million barrels per day, causing global prices to fall to $60 per barrel. The imposition of a 25% tariff by the US triggered concerns of a drop in oil demand. This undiversified growth of the economy, of course, leads to problems. Economic overdependence. This means that the Canadian economy's trade surplus is heavily dependent on energy prices. Another problem is the vulnerability to oil price shocks. This is illustrated by the examples I have given above. Looking at the share of Canada's GDP, the energy sector accounts for 10% of GDP and 20% of total exports. Alberta, one of the largest regions with oil reserves, is home to the world's third largest proven oil reserves. So why is the economy so dependent on energy? The first reason is that Canada is rich in natural resources, and the revenues from these resources have prevented other sectors from developing. In other words, they got a kind of Dutch disease. Caddy overvalued, manufacturing and exports weakened. The second reason is the overconcentration of investment in the sector. Foreign investors have put a lot of their money into this sector, and as a result, investments in other areas of production and technology have taken a back seat. This year, Canada is struggling with issues such as energy dependence and oil price shocks. The government's energy diversification policies and the industry's adaptation efforts will be decisive for Canada's energy security in the coming years. Canada lacks productivity, which makes it among the lowest among the G7 countries in terms of productivity. So what is productivity? It is the ability of a country to produce more with the same resources. But if productivity is low, real wages do not increase, living standards rise slowly, and the potential for economic growth is limited. In the last 20 years, Canada has been stagnant in this respect. According to York University's research, between 2015 and 2023, Canada's productivity is projected to fall by 0.8% on average. This means that for every hour that workers work, their output will decline by around 8% over this period. There are, of course, several reasons for such a picture. The first is that an investment in the private sector is very low. This results in Canadian companies diverting most or all of their profits to dividends or buybacks. They are seriously lagging behind, especially in areas such as artificial intelligence and automation, which are today's technologies. The third reason is that small-scale firms, or SMEs, make up the bulk of the economy in the country. As a result, they have limited capacity and financing to increase productivity. The last reason is perhaps one of the most important: mismatches between education and skills. University graduation rates may be high, but graduates lack the technical skills demanded by the market. STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math, are not strong enough. All of these things cause the economy to grow slowly, and these problems are reflected in the numbers. Namely, GDP is expected to remain in the range of 1.3 to 1.7% at the end of the year. Other reasons for the slowdown in growth are related to uncertainty in U.S. trade policies and weak domestic demand. Canada faces a productivity crisis and structural growth challenges in 2025. Declining labor productivity, global trade tensions, and weak domestic demand are straining the economy. While the government's technology investments and interest rate cuts provide short-term relief, long-term solutions require a focus on human capital and innovative production models. The rapid aging of Canada's population poses many challenges. The main one is the low labor force participation rate. This literally leads to a decline in production and tax revenues. As such, the demand for young, skilled, and productive labor is increasing, while the supply is not keeping up fast enough. In recent years, revisions to immigration policies and sectoral labor shortages have further threatened economic stability. In 2025, people over 65 will account for 23% of the population, and more than 500,000 people a year will leave the labor force due to retirement. This gap needs to be filled, but the young population and migrants cannot fill it. The problem is exacerbated by the reduction of permanent residents to 395,000 in 2025. So why is this so? First of all, birth rates are very low, well below the population replacement threshold of 2.1. Another reason is insufficient migrant integration. The reduction of permanent residency to 395,000 this year, and the fact that many of the migrants who have arrived are struggling to find jobs that match their qualifications make things difficult. Another reason is that the labor shortage is much larger in rural areas. In sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and care services, workers cannot be found. This is because most of these areas are located outside the cities and do not attract migrants and young people. Lastly, many baby boomers took advantage of the pandemic to retire early, resulting in the loss of experienced staff, especially in the health and education sectors. As a result, Canada is trying to balance demographic transformations and a labor crisis in 2025, but an aging population and a hardening of immigration policies are exacerbating sectoral deficits. Canada's economy is at an important crossroads over the next few years. Potential changes in U.S. trade policies and declining immigration levels make the country's economic future uncertain. Therefore, instead of making a clear prediction, it is healthier to proceed through three different scenarios. In the first scenario, if the U.S. imposes tariffs of up to 25% on all imports from Canada, this could severely shake the Canadian economy. Investment would stall, the dollar would weaken, export revenues would fall, and unemployment would rise, and the risk of recession would grow. And such a shock would also weaken household purchasing power. In the intermediate scenario, the U.S. would only impose a 10% tariff on Canadian products. Canada would respond in kind. However, strong U.S. domestic demand could mitigate some of these negative effects. Nevertheless, population growth would slow, and economic mobility would be limited due to low immigration targets. In the optimistic scenario, the trade war does not escalate. Immigration picks up, and the central bank cuts interest rates. Thus, per capita income starts to rise again. But no matter which scenario materializes, the common thread is clear: uncertainty. And this uncertainty can trigger other fragile structures in the economy. As a result, the Canadian economy faces multiple obstacles: tariffs from the U.S., lack of labor, and lack of diversification of the economy, an aging population. The list goes on and on. There's much more to talk about, but unfortunately time is limited. If you want to see more of this kind of content, your help motivates me a lot while making these videos. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel before watching the video. And finally, which of these three scenarios do you think the Canadian economy is heading towards? Don't forget to write in the comments. See ya.